Hi, Connie. It's great to be with you today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy, for doing this. It's such a pleasure to talk with you anytime, and to talk about these topics that we care so much about is really a thrill. So thank you for doing this.
Great. All right. Well, let's dig in then. I would love to just to learn more about why you see psychological safety as important for creating inclusive work environments, and also why it's so difficult, and including it's so difficult despite the recent national reckoning on race.
Boy, I get asked this question so much, as I know you do as well. It's amazing how much attention is now being paid to psychological safety in light of the racial reckoning that we've had. I think it's such a fundamental concept to allow people to speak up that to me, it's so obvious that you can't have an inclusive workforce, you can't have an inclusive team unless people can do that. But it's not so obvious as how to create those inclusive and psychologically safe work environments, as you know. But I have been seeing more and more the realization that just because someone's sitting in the room and seeming to contribute doesn't mean they're really bringing their full set of ideas and reactions and concerns and questions to the conversation. So this is where the idea of going beyond just the numbers, just representation is so important. And I've had students in my class, for example, just 2 weeks ago, say to me, you know, I feel really heard and seen in this conversation. And I wonder how many times in the workplace people think that they're hearing and seeing each other, but they're really not. And this is a student who is a person of color. And just even having these open conversations about race and the impact it can have on silence and on contribution, just even talking about these things was so helpful to her to feel included. And that's why I think psychological safety is so important. Now, in terms of how to create psychological safety, as you know, it's not easy, because our natural tendency in organizations is to protect ourselves, to avoid risk, and it's risky to speak up.
Right.
And there are many stories that my clients and students have told me about what happens when you speak up. And those are legends that live, and they're repeated and transferred. And it's a big warning to people to kind of toe the line, follow what your boss is doing and keep your mouth shut otherwise. And so to break through that, it requires a huge mind shift. I think I'm a part of everyone. It's a mind shift because you have to, first of all, be committed enough to think this is important. And this is also where I think inclusion relates, because so many people are paying lip service to inclusion, but not really digging in and really saying, I'm willing to take the hits. I'm really to take the risks to make this a reality in my organization. So first of all, it's that commitment, and then you talk about in your book so beautifully the stages of first of all creating a sincere invitation, tying it to the goals of the organization so there makes sense why people's input is needed, and then really actively searching out and being specific about what kind of input are you looking for? How can you get that? I always stun and dismay executives when I tell them some of the things that people do that sound good on paper that really aren't that kind of invitation that you talk about. So for example, just saying I have an open door policy. I equate it to, okay, so I've met, some new neighbors, and I've told them, stop by for a drink anytime, day or night, doesn't matter. Just come into my kitchen and open up the fridge and have yourself a drink. No one's going to do that. They need that, specific invitation that says, Friday night, do you want to come over at 5 o'clock? Let's talk, let's get to know each other. And similarly in organizations, the invitation needs to be specific and clear. And then of course, the response to when people speak up is huge. And as you know, that's why those cautionary tales live so large, because the one person who was shot down or the boss belittled the person or ignored the person, that's going to shut up everybody else in the room for a while. So just having really active consideration to positive consequences for speaking up, for celebrations, that's another important part of the puzzle.
I agree with you. And I think it's one of the things that is so powerful is when you have those good examples, right? When someone has a positive response, say to bad news or to a problem of some kind, and those also spread like wildfire, right? So, and those have a very powerful culture creating impact. I want to go back to something you said about the student coming up to you and saying, I really feel included, or I really feel heard in this class. It's a wonderful story. And it seems to me that one of the things that we have to help people in organizations do is notice the things that aren't happening, right? Because that student could have easily not come to you and said that. Right. And you wouldn't have noticed its absence as weird. It would be natural for someone not to come and say that to you. And so, and yet in the workplace, you know, when people are not feeling included, when they're not speaking up with problems, or when they're not speaking up to express their appreciation for that experience they're having, you can't just think all is well, right? You have to stop yourself and go, what am I not hearing, right? And then get curious about it. And this is really almost a self-discipline of managers and team leaders and even peers everywhere.
Right. I think this is, you know, I think the problem is that we take a lack of feedback, positive or negative, as affirmation, as, you know, things are going well. And again, it requires us to go out there and get that feedback, really find out, but in a way that allows people to have those conversations. So as another example, in my class, I collect 3-minute memos at the end of every class, and they're private memos just to me. And I ask them questions about what they learned and how they can apply it. But then I always say, like, what else is going on with you, or anything else about this class you want to share? And I make it really clear what will happen with the feedback, what won't happen with the feedback. But the invitation is there. It's a routine. You know, every single week I'm going to ask them for these, you know, their same kind of input. And so, you know, I've already learned through those memos, there's a lot I didn't know, or that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't asked, if I hadn't provided that opportunity for them to give me feedback. I mean, even things as like, wow, your breaks are way too short, you know, just like things like that you just have to kind of, you know, assume you don't know and go out and find the information.
Well, one of the things that I really like about the work you've done is that it certainly is consistent with and builds on and adds to the work I've done. It also goes further, right? It goes further into some issues that I'm not at all expert in, but I think are not only important, I think they're of growing importance in today's workplace. So let me just ask you about a couple of these topics. So, for example, loneliness is something that you have studied in some depth in the workplace. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about metrics that allow us to understand the level and spread of disconnection or loneliness among employees, and why that matters so much.
Sure. It's interesting. I think I've always been interested in what makes people feel engaged and satisfied at work. And I learned a long time ago that the quality of the work tasks themselves and the job design do matter for sure. So does supervision, matters a lot. But what seems to carry the day are those relationships with coworkers. And so I really didn't start out studying loneliness per se. I was studying social connection among coworkers. And as I would call my dissertation, I was really interested in how people can use each other at work to process the emotions of their jobs, particularly tough jobs, healthcare jobs dealing with, you know, difficult child abuse, lawsuits, you know, special education, emergency response, disasters. And it was so clear to me that having a strong connection with the people at work who you could be, again, psychologically safe, you could reveal what was happening to you, was the number one thing that helped people cope. It was being able to say, wow, this just happened. I'm so sad, or I'm so frustrated, or conversely, I'm so thrilled. This worked out. This person got better, for example. And it's a very different experience for people who don't have those colleagues that they can go to. So where do those emotions go? They end up sort of locked inside, or perhaps they get turned, to something outside, whether it's friends and family, or maybe even a professional therapist. But the reality is that people at work understand your job better than anybody else outside of it, even if you're not in the same function.
Right.
And so it's that feeling that I noticed among people I talked to. You could tell the ones who had those colleagues and those that didn't. And so that's really where I started to look at the opposite side of social connection, which is this feeling of loneliness. And then I did some more research on actual, social psychology, and that's where a lot of the loneliness work is been coming in from clinical psychology. And in fact, you talk about metrics, the best metric we have right now is the UCLA loneliness scale. Unfortunately, it's 25 items long, and most executives don't want to rate 25 item survey, but I and others are working on a shorter version. But we saw in the other research on loneliness how much the physical impact was on people: shorter lifespans, greater levels of disease, and other comorbid conditions like alcohol abuse, for example. Well, the reality is those same conditions also show up in the workplace. If people are lonely at work, they're also likely to be your employees who are suffering in some other way physically, or they will eventually if it's not addressed. And so it started to really make sense to me that this is an issue not just about helping people feel good at work. It's truly about their health. It's about their physical health. It's also, of course, about the productivity and effectiveness of them on the job. Because if you're lonely, again, you're not going to have enough really support and reserves to help you get through the work and do your best. So that's how I ended up kind of studying this. And I still hope to study connection more than loneliness, but I think we have to deal with the fact that people are lonely. They were lonely before the pandemic, and they are much lonelier now on balance. And I am starting to see many, many companies talking about this, which I think is a good thing. I was just at a seminar a couple of weeks ago put on by the Human Resource Policy Institute at BU. And we had guest speakers from Hewlett Packard and Cigna and Lincoln Financial, all talking about how concerned they are about the mental health of their employees, the loneliness they're experiencing, the sense of isolation. And I think, again, this is a great thing if there are some silver linings of the pandemic, I would never have wished for this, but I am glad that it's raised awareness of the prevalence of these kinds of issues and about the responsibility that we all have, no matter the domain, to address them.
I think that's true. I also see that as a silver lining, that there's greater awareness, just as there's greater awareness of racial issues in this country. There's greater awareness of some of the very real struggles that people are having in across industries even. So I love this work that you've done, because I have long thought, first, this is a given. There are many people in many jobs who are feeling excess stress, who are really feeling, bordering on burnout. They're really struggling with the incredibly challenging tasks and conditions that they face every day. And I've long thought, and your work really emphasizes this, that people can do just about anything. They can rise to the occasion, they can get the job done if they feel they're working together, they're in it together, that they have real, true friends in their colleagues, that they're kind of in it together, they care about each other, they support each other. And that, of course, is quite consistent with what I would call a psychologically safe environment as well. So I think the more that message can get out there, and the more sort of research and tools that you can do and provide to people for helping with these challenges, the better. Let me ask another question. You mentioned the pandemic. How might the return to the office spur dysfunctional behaviors around COVID-19 compliance, and in turn undermining psychological safety and trust? And then, of course, what might we do about that?
Well, return to, there's no, I know you wrote in a recent piece, there is no back to normal. We're not going back, we're going forward. So it's not even the return, the advancement into new phases of office and work life that we are facing right now are just riddled with landmines, I think, unfortunately. And one of them is around this issue of compliance with protocols. So there's just so much polarization about what is safe, what's not safe in terms of the physical protocols, which then engenders all sorts of psychologically, risks as well. So I'll give you a small example from my own situation where I believe firmly in following the rules. I am a rule follower. And so, we have lots of rules at BU to keep students and faculty and staff safe on campus. And I've been teaching on campus for the last 6 months. And so even with all that, and the reminders, we check our badges, make sure everyone's following all the protocols. I had a student in my class who I know has had COVID in the last 6 months. And his nose, his mask kept falling down from his nose the entire class. And it was so distracting to me. And I should have stopped class. And I should have said, hey, please put your mask on. But I didn't. And of all the people, I would think as the head of the classroom, I would feel safe enough to do that. But I kept second guessing myself. Is that necessary? I know he's probably immune. And it was, like I said, so distracting. And so now imagine it's your boss whose mask keeps slipping off of their nose during the meeting. Who's going to speak up to that? And so there could be, all sorts of other ways that people are going to do workarounds as well. I know lots of companies are, planning to enforce rules, but then their other managers will say, oh, I don't really care, just show it when you're walking through the lobby. And after that, don't worry. But that puts people to have to manage those decisions and those call outs of each other, on the burdens on each individual person. So I think that's a big deal that companies need to think more about. And, you cannot really have great collaboration when you're also enforcing compliance on each other. So separating those out, I think the roles need to be separated. I think there needs to be, a clear enforcement of norms from other than, peer-to-peer or peer upward. So that's one aspect. But I think there's also just going to be a whole lot of anxiety around the return to the office regardless, because it's going to create another set of disruptions and routines that we've now gotten used to over the last year. There will still, again, be the shadow of health risks, even if everyone is 100% compliant. And so anytime there's increased anxiety, everything feels riskier. It's just like, that's why, you need to sort of take down the temperature of people in order to be able to have to really engage in therapeutic work, for example. If someone's so anxious, they can't see straight, they can't think straight. And so I do think that, again, companies need to be very proactive about understanding that level of anxiety that a lot of employees will bring back to the office with them. And also, figure out ways to address it, be open about it. Modeling from a leader standpoint, I think will be really important here as well. But psychological safety was already, as you know, a challenge. And now when we think about this issue of physical safety to manage through compliance, as well as just the unknowns and the changes that are happening to people's routines all over again, I think it's just going to be really, really, really difficult. But I always want to look for the bright side. I will say, though, again, on the bright side, it's we're having these conversations in a way that's so much more open than it used to be. I see in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Forbes, all the time now in the last few months, there's been articles about the challenges to mental health, the rise of anxiety, and how companies are trying to get ahead of it. So there is some hope, but it will not happen magically. People and companies are going to have to be really thoughtful about this.
I think one thing that companies have working in their favor is that this is genuinely new territory, right? And so long as company leaders or managers at any level and really employees at any level can keep reminding themselves and each other, we've never done this before, right? It gives us permission to be beginners. And beginners aren't supposed to have all the answers or all the skills. So I think about your story about the student whose mask was falling off in class. I mean, wouldn't it be great to give yourself permission to say, hold on, I got to let you know I'm distracted and here's why. And I'm not quite sure the best way to handle this, but I just thought I'll tell you how I'm thinking, right? And chances are that moment would work fine, right? Because you're humble about the not knowing. And I think that the more everybody starts, we're going to be in more trouble in a funny way once we're back in some kind of semblance of a routine, whatever that might look like, where we no longer have permission to kind of get it wrong or say, wait, how's this supposed to work? Aren't we supposed to have masks? Just checking. I mean,
right.
I don't really know.
I know. And how many times can you say that before, you do feel like the town crier?
Right.
But I agree with you. I think we also have to recognize human nature craves kind of predictability and control and routine. And so we also do have a limited window to solidify psychological safety, as well as some of these other behaviors before we get set. And just for the sake of, people just want to be done with new stuff. They want to go, feeling like stuff is no longer so new anymore. They want to settle into some kind of pattern. And we just have to hope that that's the right pattern that people set into.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question and then turn it over to you. So more generally, I know you've been giving some thought to mental health issues in the workplace more generally. Why is this a growing concern, and how can managers be helped in thinking about this clearly?
Well, so it's a growing concern partly because much like inclusion and other things, it's been below the surface and not really seen until now. That the ways in which people suppress the struggles that they have and hide and deny them, with often sort of implicit agreement with the organization, the don't ask, don't tell kind of approach to knowing those kinds of things. And I do understand that. Again, people are not trained therapists. A manager doesn't necessarily want to know that I'm struggling with major depression at the moment, because that, she or he may not know exactly what to do about that. But again, denying something or pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. And so I've had the great benefit of getting to know many of the excellent physicians at McLean Psychiatric Hospital, and they've really sort of shown me how the demand is just increasing and increasing among working adults for mental health services, which is outside of work and often not known within work. But again, people spend so much of their time at work that there's no way they can shut off those issues once they're there. And so I really think that that this is something we can destigmatize talking about in the workplace. There was actually a nice article a couple of years ago in the Harvard Business Review about how we need to talk about mental health more at work. Unfortunately, it didn't get a ton of traction as far as I can tell at that time, but I think now it's that can be heard more. And as I said, just going back to this webinar I attended recently with some leaders from these companies saying this is a big deal for them. So I want to be careful, though, that what I'm not advocating necessarily is, we need to improve our healthcare insurance coverage so that people can have more therapeutic visits outside of work. I'm talking about actually dealing with stuff at work. In this article, for example, they interview a high, flying successful executive who said that she just wanted to let her boss know that she was switching antidepressants because it may have an effect on her mood and her energy and so forth. And she said, I don't feel there's any reason to hide that any more than if I was changing, my blood pressure medicine, or that I had to go do some outpatient surgery and there might be some tail to that. So just being able to talk about that, I'm owning my responsibility as a worker at work, which is to say, like, if there's something that it might impinge upon my ability to do my job, I can talk about this. This is something that I will share, not for the sense of just gathering sympathy per se, but to engage in a conversation about how can we address this so that we can all benefit, so that we all can be better. And I think that's the shift that needs to happen, as opposed to something that needs to be dark and hidden and only dealt with, in the shadows outside of work, to something that can be addressed in a productive manner as colleagues.
We need to remove the stigma for sure, and expand our sense of what's what's acceptable to talk about. It's an acceptable part of the human experience.
So when I was doing some work on team meetings, we had this very simple pulse check that we did at the beginning, where we just do the smiley face. So, you know, it goes from like the happy smiley face to like the frowny face. And it was effective because it was just like a gut level emotional monitor. It's the same thing you give to kids like at the pediatrician's office because they can't read and fill out the forms yet. But it works for adults too. And I think it is this sense of like, yes, can we expand? It doesn't have to be clinical levels of mental health issues, but can we expand it to be able to talk about these emotions and how we're feeling at work? And the reason it was asked at the beginning of meetings in this study was because if people are saying like, I'm not fully here, I'm having a bad time, like that's a problem to solve together. That right. Again is information that's useful to the group, but also so is positive emotions. You know, that's something that also that you can, if you don't know about them, you can't capitalize on them and build on them.
Yeah, I love that. So let me turn it over to you. Do you want to ask, do you have questions you want to ask me?
I do. I'm so happy I get a chance to. So, actually right following from that last point I was making, so in my dissertation research, which you recall, one of the things that I didn't expect to find, but did find, was that people had a great deal of reticence about sharing positive emotions. And the way I understood it through these interviews was that it was, again, another risk reward calculation. And essentially what the calculation told them was, I'm feeling good, whether it's something I did or something that my client did or patient did or something that just worked out. And if I share it with somebody and I'm validated, I'll get probably a bump for myself. I'll feel a little bit, maybe even better. I'll share the joy. But there's a huge risk that they dismiss it, they react negatively to it, in which case now I've lost all that positive emotion that I was feeling. And so therefore, why talk about it? You know, in the inverse with negative emotions, you know, you're already feeling lousy, and the idea of talking to somebody who can help you and validate you may make you feel better. And that's really like an attractive outcome. It could also make you feel a bit worse, but there's sort of a bit, well, I'm already feeling bad. Like how much worse could I feel? And so this really has me thinking about positive emotions in light of psychological safety. So we talk about, you and I talk about psychological safety as you know, questions, concerns, ideas, and mistakes. There's no positives. Well, I guess no ideas. Yeah, is positive. But what about just like, I'm like feeling positively, I'm very, you know, happy about something that happened. I want to share that with you. What do you think? Does psychological safety, is that just as necessary for sharing positive emotions?
I love that question. I do think psychological safety is just as important for sharing positive emotions. I think when people are having a positive emotion, or they're feeling good about something they did, there are many reasons why they might not want to speak up, right? One might be they don't want to be seen as a show off, or they don't want to be seen as boasting, or they don't want someone else to feel bad because they didn't have a good encounter just now with their patient or customer or what have you. And so I think it's a very important issue to bring up, because I think part of when I talk about psychological safety, I'm often trying to counter the misperception that this is all rainbows and roses, right? That having a psychologically safe workplace means that everybody's comfortable and happy and just having a great old time. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, what it means is we're able to speak up about what's going on. So depending on the balance of positivity or negativity that's going on, that might alter the content of what we say. But I think the question of whether psychological safety is necessary for or applies to the sharing of positive emotions or good news, I think the answer is a resounding yes. And this really does matter. I suspect, but don't know, that if I feel unable to share my good news or my positive feelings, I'm going to feel just a little bit lonelier and just a little bit more disconnected, and then maybe even a little bit less engaged. And so I think we really do need work environments of candor. Mm-hmm. And I like to say that a psychologically safe environment is one in which we feel that candor is expected. Right? It doesn't make it easy. Yeah. It's not that, oh, this is just a breeze here. I'll say anything I want and, it's never challenging at all. No, I think often it feels like it takes some courage. But I think of courage and psychological safety as two halves of the same coin. But I love the question because I think it helps us make sure we're being clear and we're broadening the domain of what people might be reluctant to speak up about.
Well, I think it's so interesting too that you talked about all those other reasons why people do think, oh, I don't want to share, I don't want to look like I'm bragging, or I don't want to hurt, make them feel bad. I think those are absolutely true. But it also does remind me of the rationalizations that we make in our heads when we don't speak up about the other stuff as well. And we can tell ourselves stories all day long about how we're being, perfectly rational to just stay quiet. They don't need to know that. I don't want to bother them. It'll slow us down. I don't have a great idea anyway. There's all sorts of things that we tell ourselves. So I think, for me, I would love to study this, but I think it does go back to like, can you create those sincere invitations to start? Like, can you really sort of make it clear that, no, you do want to hear those things, and that you're not going to react as negatively as someone might fear. Well, thank you for that. And, I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about this notion of, is there a personality attribute associated with being more psychologically safe than others? And so some people think extroversion, which I don't think necessarily is, but what about this idea about like having core self-esteem or a certain level of confidence in yourself? So again, just to the point where you don't discount your ideas as much because you sort of feel, well, I'm intelligent enough, I can probably come up with something useful. Have you studied that, or do you know anything that would help us understand like who might be a natural psychologically safe ally?
It's a great question, and I'll say I only have one formal study that I did. There may be others out there, and maybe you and I will look for them. But the only study I personally was involved in where we had measures of personality, and in this case, it was the famous Big Five measures. It was both deeply reassuring that what we found was that of the Big Five, which is extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness, none of them had any relationship to psychological safety experiences at work in these teams. And I was so glad about that, right? Because I did not want this to be about being an extrovert. It isn't. Right? It's about these sort of almost taken for granted beliefs about whether it's okay to say what I'm thinking. The only one, and this is also reassuring, the only Big Five personality attribute that had a statistically significant correlation with perceptions of psychological safety is neuroticism, obviously in the opposite direction, where the more a person scores high on the neuroticism scale, the lower they will tend to experience the psychological safety in their midst. And of course, that makes good sense because neuroticism is a kind of captures a perception that, others might be out to get you. It's not a safe place, right? So it's almost it was a beautiful result. But even with that result, and hopefully in, most workplaces, we don't have too many people that are too high on neuroticism, which is different, by the way, than conscientiousness, right? So conscientiousness is people really wanting to do a good job and being committed to doing so. Whereas neuroticism can border on a kind of belief that others are out to get you, and it's not necessarily the healthiest of the traits. A little neuroticism is probably good for all of us, but not too much, right? But this data set, like all of the other data sets that I've had and that I know about, basically say the interesting thing about psychological safety is that it varies more across teams than within them. Right. So that even, in a team, the different team members may be very, very different from each other in personality, in background, even in identity group. And yet in a functioning team, they tend to start to have a shared belief about what's acceptable around here in terms of speaking up, right? That just starts to, it's an emergent property, it starts to take hold, which means that the real leverage in trying to make it happen is in trying to create teams that have shared beliefs and norms around candor.
Mm-hmm. And it's not dependent on the individual personalities that you happen to assemble into that team, right? I think that's another reason why it's been, in addition to your work and your terrific book, The Fearless Organization, that psychological safety has gotten so much press, is of course the work of Project Aristotle at Google. And that was essentially, what the famous New York Times article by Charles Duhigg talked about, which is that, we thought it was going to be who was on the team and what they were like, but it turned out it wasn't. And so I think that does, I think, help address it. I still wonder though, if there might be a key person in the team who, like as the manager, someone who has a certain self-esteem or confidence might help perpetuate or accelerate the development of psychological safety if they have that kind of influence. And this is just a hypothesis. I have no data.
Actually, thanks for bringing that up again, because I do agree that having more self-confidence is, I don't have formal data on this, but I do believe that having more self-confidence makes it easier to speak up. And the only data I have that's even close to this is that there's our wonderful colleague Jim Dietert and I did some research on taken for granted theories about related to speaking up at work, and one of them was not a good idea to speak up if you don't have all your ducks in a row. I mean, it wasn't phrased that way, but if you don't have all, if you don't have solid data or really, you're right, not a good idea to speak up. That's a belief that there is variance on, right? Some people hold to it very, very highly, others more loosely. That was the one taken for granted theory about speaking up that had real gender differences. Right? There were several of these kind of beliefs about what's appropriate at work, but that was the one where there were real gender differences. And I think that rings true for many women and many people whose colleagues are women, that often women will put the threshold for what is okay to speak up about. How confident do I have to be to say something too high and maybe higher than their male colleagues. And so, here's the problem, right? And everybody knows this, but self-confidence is not perfectly correlated with competence. Right?
Yes.
And so we don't want, on the one hand, people might be thinking, well, it's okay for people to hold back when they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah, sure. I agree.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there is not a perfect relationship between self-confidence and competence. And so oftentimes when someone just doesn't have self-confidence, if they're holding back and not sharing their thoughts, there's a real loss to the rest of the team.
Well, and this really is going back to the conversation about inclusion, because people of color or other disadvantaged demographic groups and organizations also have that higher bar set for themselves. And often because they've been getting implicit feedback on that, they have to be better. They have to be, they cannot make a mistake in an organization and let down or let all that cynicism, take place if people think they don't really belong there. And so I think that is a really big issue. But as you said, I also agree that there are some people whose confidence may cause them to speak up and actually squelch the voices of others, which is also says that, too much confidence can be a bad thing as well. So,
and you and I have talked about this many times, but neither one of us is saying psychological safety is the only factor that matters around here, right? Psychological safety is a factor that helps people not hold back, that helps people be candid, be engaged, all in. But there's also other factors like clarity about what's needed, clarity about performance standards, or good process techniques that allow us to have a thoughtful conversation or a thoughtful debate. And the combination of those things is what you really need when you're dealing with high uncertainty, a need for innovation, You need more than just psychological safety to have a really good team meeting, for example.
Right, and that accountability, is a general theme too that you talk about. I loved showing the 2x2 chart about the different zones where you cross accountability or attention to results with psychological safety, and how the goal really is to get to that learning zone. So you do need both. So again, right. in an ideal world, if someone's confident without the sufficient competence behind it, they would get that feedback. That's part of being psychologically safe, to say, actually, maybe your confidence needs to go down a few notches, at least on this topic. So it can be mitigated in the right circumstances with the safety. Well, I have one more question for you, because it's actually very timely, because I'm collecting data on Wednesday about this, which is that, so I've been really experimenting with the launch of virtual teams, because this is such a big issue. Even before the pandemic, I was doing some work on this, and now everybody wants to know, what do we do about these virtual teams? We've been trying for a year now to figure it out. And so I have a simple experiment that I'm doing to see if you had, the basic premise is this: if you had just an hour to launch a team, and let's assume everybody's busy and time is precious, so you only have 1 hour, are you better off spending that getting to know each other in a team, like actually having a full team conversation? Or would you be better off having smaller one-on-one conversations where equal voice is more likely to occur, and where people who may be a little bit more introverted or may feel more risk in speaking up will have those risks lowered, because they're just talking to one person at a time? So in the experiment, we are setting up teams that don't know each other to get together in one of those conditions, so the one-on-one sort of rotating conversations among each other, or in just one big group setting. And then they go off and do a performance task. And we're trying to understand things at the team level, like performance and speed, but also trying to understand at the individual level to what degree they feel psychological safety, and to which degree do they feel sort of engaged and happy about the experience they've had with this team, regardless of the performance outcome. So this is my grand chance here.
How big is the team?
Okay, so for the sake of time, because we had to constrain it, we only have 4-person teams. Okay. So it will, because that's the only way we can make the math work, so that each team could have one-on-ones in the same amount of time without making people meet for 3 hours to start. So, so what do you think? What is your hypothesis about what will happen?
And these are virtual teams, right?
Yes.
So I was influenced the other day by reading about this Stanford study about why we really are all exhausted from Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And one of the arguments, so this is probably coming in from left field, but one of the arguments was, when we have one-on-one meetings, it's actually kind of artificially intimate because of the technology. Like if you and I were together in a meeting room, we might be on either side of the table, or we might go down and have some lunch or something. But depending on how big your screen is and how big my screen is, you might be sort of larger and closer to me than I normally would interact with someone, right, who isn't my mate. Right? So in a way, and it says that you might not even be consciously aware that this is a little bit disconcerting, but that there's a part of your brain that's now busy sort of working and reacting to this excessive intimacy. Now, you could fix that by having the one-on-ones have small, just as a controlled, you could have maybe make the postage stamp size faces. But let's say that wasn't part of the conversation. I would like almost a hybrid, which is, let's have the full team of 4 meet, but let's have a structured process. Like we're each going to go around and, say our favorite work experience that we ever had, or we're each going, in other words, we're going to share some little vignette that tells you something about me and helps me learn something about you, which strikes me as the more, like, I want to feel good about all of you. I want to learn something about all of you. And I don't want to just have it be, ooh, I really liked Connie, but then I didn't like Matt so much. And so so my hypothesis, but again, we'd have to think this through, would be that let's do the whole team, but let's do it in a structured way so someone can't just take over.
Yeah, well, I think I don't have it structured in that way. We do have it so that they have to, in both conditions, they have to answer some prompts, and it is about finding commonalities among them with, trying to overstack the deck for them to find something to like about Mark. But yeah, I think that's really, it's really interesting to hear what you think about that. But it also relates back to this notion of psychological safety living at the group level. And so one thing that, behind this is this idea of, can you get to the group level kind of brick by brick, like one relationship at a time, until you as a group kind of find that ultimate level of synergy and safety? Or is it something that can actually, it's risky to do it that way, in the sense of that if you discover you really don't like that one person, that negative experience may undermine your ability to feel that safety at a group level?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, it's, and maybe it may in part depend on the kind of work we do. How interdependent is it? Are we a team because we're all sort of sitting side by side fielding customer service calls, or are we a team that has to, design something together in a very reciprocally interdependent way? And then, the answer might be different.
Yeah, well, stay tuned.